Hello, everyone. I just thought I would get back with a couple of more points regarding this planting this crop, that corn crop that's yet to be planted. Good night's sleep adds to some clarity of thinking, and so there was a couple of points I missed yesterday that I think are important to include. Number one, when we do get out and finally get back at this crop, I always suggest that you forget any idea of putting nitrogen on. Particularly if you have to wait for a spreader to put urea on or wait for your favorite custom applicator to come in and blow nitrogen on. Just get the planter going and keep it going. Same with PPI herbicides like Primextra or Integrity. Don't fuss if you can't get that on. Get the planter in the ground and keep it moving. Nitrogen can be applied pre and post-emergent with side dress applicators. There are lots of options on pre-herbicides, pre-emergent herbicides, and post-emergent herbicides to get good weed control. It's not ideal, it's not perfection. However, this year we're going to have to give up on our ideas of perfection, in my opinion. Point number two, when it comes to seeding depth, make sure you keep that seeding depth at a good 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Don't be fooled by moisture conditions and be tempted to plant corn at 1.5 inches or 1 inch or less, I should say. It is nothing but a recipe for disaster as you get into root development later in the season. And you'll have more uniform emergence with more deeper planting depths at close to that 2 inches. And that uniform emergence will more than pay for itself versus maybe that 2 or 3 days difference in emergence time versus a shallow planted situation. So again, keep the depth there where it should be. Point number three, Brian, my son, made an excellent point this morning. He says, Dad, I've talked to a couple people suggesting that they want to cut back some population in corn just because, as you talked about, you're going to get a bigger plant and maybe reducing population a little bit will reduce the stress. But he says, and we're not going to be planting in perfect conditions anymore. We're going to have some tough spots, some bony, wet, lumpy areas in fields. He says we're not going to get great emergence on there. We're probably going to need every seed in the planter that we normally would have just to give us hopefully a little more uniform emergence, uniform population. And he's bang on. There's no question. So you definitely keep seeding rates at normal levels. Don't, in my opinion, shave that very much. You might come back at a couple of thousand, but please don't reduce those seeding rates very much. The final point I want to make, and it's with respect to this hybrid maturity thing. I sometimes, and already have got a little bit of pushback from people in the industry that say, well, we really should stick to this 25th of May before we switch to start pulling back on hybrid maturity. And my point on that is simply this. Part of the database that we use for determining that date, part of it is U.S. data. And I've listened as well to U.S. agronomists talking about how important it is to stay with full season hybrids because the moisture differential is very, very small. Well, you must remember that in the American Midwest, they're used to harvesting corn at 18 to 22%. And in that environment, sure, 100 heat units, 150 heat units is not going to make any more than maybe a point and a half in moisture. So what if it's 20% corn versus 22% corn? That's no big deal. But you get into our situation here, particularly with a shorter growing season as a definite risk that we have to realize and face, that full season hybrids could very well be over 30%. And shaving 100, 150, 200 heat units off will gain you a good solid 2 to 3 points of moisture advantage. And farm dryers do not like corn that's 32 and 33 or 34%. They don't function properly. It's hard to handle. And it's important that we have corn under 30%. And for that part of that reason is why I'm a little bit quicker to pull maturities in that regard. The second thing, and it comes into actually thinking about mental health. If it will help you sleep, and it certainly would help me sleep through the summer by being a little bit conservative on maturity. It's no point. We've had enough stress through the bomb issues this past winter, and this weather trend might just persist for a while. We could be looking at some slower development. And in that situation, just from being able to relax slightly through the balance of the growing season, I think early maturity is not a horrible thing to go with. The other thing you're going to hear real quickly about soybean planting and their standard recommendation on soybean varieties as well. You got to keep that adapted to full season soybean planted from a yield point of view right through to the latter part, to at least the middle of June or maybe later. And my point on that is simply this. Well, that's fine and dandy as well, but when you get to the 15th of October and it's 11 o'clock in the morning and you've got soybeans that are 17 to 18% and are a real pig to thrash, and you have to wait till 2 o'clock in the afternoon for them to get down to 16%, where you actually can do a reasonable job of putting them through the machine. And by 6 o'clock, the sun's gone down, and all of a sudden they're back to 17, 18%. So all you've got to accomplish that day is 3 to 4 hours worth of harvest activity. You want to talk about mental stress, that's mental stress as well. So even on soybeans, I wouldn't be opposed as we certainly get into potentially the second week in June, then maybe it would be wise to even shorten that back up a little bit just to give you the satisfaction of being able to harvest at least when there's still some sunshine and warmth in the first part of October. So that's just a couple of thoughts I have that always aren't accommodated in the hardcore yield data. So that's it for today. Hopefully we can make some progress coming forward in the next few days, but we'll see. Thank you very much. Take care.